Hey guys, it's a pleasure for me to talk to you guys today. So for those of you who may not be familiar with me, you probably see me a little bit in the community here and there. But Neil McGlennon, I'm a principal architect here at SailPoint. Been at SailPoint for I think we're close to like 15 years now. Wow, time flies. Wanted to present today on something that's pretty cool. It's a neat feature that is in the same vein of extensibility. And so this is really community spotlight around our AWS Event Bridge. And so what this really involves is the concept of extensibility. And so, you may be asking, well, why is extensibility so great? You probably heard Colin and some of the earlier presenters talk a little bit about extensibility. But just to kind of reiterate and talk a little bit more about why we would use these things, including, the AWS Event Bridge. Really it's about, automating integrations, right? And making sure that, the SailPoint, SaaS platform is part of a broader ecosystem and that we can integrate and automate at a broader scale, more than just within the SailPoint ecosystem, but externally as well. And, with AWS, that really extends into, the AWS cloud, right? The various things that you guys may have developed over there, whether that's custom apps, or homegrown solutions or things like that, we can all automate to that. So we can bring identity to that broad ecosystem. Really helps, deliver information as it occurs. These are all real-time events, and our SaaS cloud is all very event driven. So, the other thing this opens up is technology alliances. One of the things is with the AWS Event Bridge, this has really fostered a great partnership with AWS itself. And so, we actually have, talked with AWS and around this very topic on a session we called Howdy Partner a couple years back. And so, we're excited to continue that partnership with AWS, as well as all of our technology alliance partners, and take that extensibility into other solutions. The other thing that this does is really allow you guys. It allows you guys to be flexible with your solutions. It allows you to be creative and come up with new solutions to new problems, right? You're not necessarily pigeonholed into things on the SaaS platform. You now can be opened up to broader sets of feature functionality. And so this also includes your language of choice. Unlike like IdentityIQ, where it's very Java oriented. We have events and APIs that go out to a modern ecosystem. And that modern ecosystem, can be interfaced with, your language of choice, whether that's PowerShell or Ruby or Java or JavaScript, Python, you name it, even Go. So there's a lot of different things that you guys can put to bear, and that's really what the developer community is really all about. So, to start this off, what we're really going to also talk about here is event triggers. Now, you heard Colin and others talk a bit about event triggers and why they're great. It's a common, design pattern of the SaaS world. And so what we're going to be talking about is, how these work. And so, if you think about it, a way we interface with our cloud is we have, SailPoint on the left, your other clouds on the right. We allow things like your REST APIs to call in and get data. But also, as things occur, whether it's in response to REST APIs and processes that you invoke, or just things that naturally occur, or data changing, event triggers can be sent out to target systems. And so this is kind of a yin and yang type of process. These are very complementary. And you notice that if you look at some of the designs of our REST APIs and our event triggers, they're all very compatible. They use a lot of similar terminologies. They use a lot of similar references. And that's all by design. And that part of that design is really just to give you guys, our developer community, a good way of interfacing with these things. So now, this particular presentation, we're talking about Event Bridge, is really focused around event trigger side of this equation. And so those event triggers are things that are occurring within that SaaS platform, and we're going to go send those over to the cloud. Now, another way you can think about event triggers is, if something occurs in SailPoint, then you can make something occur somewhere else. Now, those can be, things in other platforms like ServiceNow. We have people that have taken things like, our event triggers and send them natively over to ServiceNow, and they can invoke, processes over there. We've had people take these event triggers and send them to iPaaS systems. iPaaS systems are integration platforms as a service, essentially SaaS workflows in the cloud. And things like Workato or Zapier, or there's tons of others, SnapLogic. There's probably more than I can really announce in the time given. Those can all be consumers of these as well. We can also internalize these things to workflows. And you guys have seen that with the wonderful workflow engine that we've built. And they can also be sent to things like your custom code, so anything that you build. Now, what happens if the things that you build are on AWS? Well, EventBridge is that way of an easy way of getting the things that are events in SailPoint and bringing them over to AWS via the AWS EventBridge. And so this is what it's all about. If you're not familiar with AWS EventBridge, you can go to this URL right here. But AWS EventBridge is essentially a serverless event bus, is the way you can think about it. And it's designed to connect application components that you build to your event-driven applications. And so, the things that come in via EventBridge, whether they're your own things or our things, like SailPoint things, they all can go through this event bus. We also have native AWS EventBridge integration to make this easier. You can technically do this with just an HTTP call if you want. But, there's not really a need to. The AWS EventBridge is just a drop-down menu, and it figures it all out for you. It does all the pairing on the AWS side and everything. And so we're going to walk through kind of how to set some of those up together. I have a demo. In fact, all the artifacts that we have today, I'm going to share in the Discord chat after this. So you guys will be able to build your own components. You'll be able to follow along, later with these recordings. And you can also use these as kind of a starter kit, to go and build your own things. So AWS EventBridge is really cool technology. It's a way of bridging, SailPoint stuff in an event-driven manner into the AWS world and connect your applications or things that you're building. So let's walk through a couple scenarios. So today I'm going to walk through 3 scenarios with you guys. So the first one that I'm going to walk through is around really just SailPoint monitoring our SaaS platform. And so what we do is we're going to have our Identity Security Cloud Identity Now solution, and we're going to have some events that originate from there. We're going to configure some event triggers. And those event triggers are going to go to AWS via the AWS EventBridge. Now, once those events arrive in an AWS EventBridge, we're going to send those to another service within the AWS ecosystem. And that other service is CloudWatch. If you're not familiar with what CloudWatch is, it's kind of like a log aggregator. And essentially, what we're going to do is stream events that may be of interest to us into the CloudWatch area of AWS. And so, this is going to be successes or failure events from our event trigger platform. And so we're going to do this together. We're going to build all these things out, and you'll see how easy it is. This is the kind of the easiest one to do. As we progress, they're going to get a little bit harder and use a little bit different technologies. So let's get in. Let's get our hands dirty. So I'm going to switch over here and see how this works. Let's see. All right. So I have 2 tabs open here. And I have my Identity Now tenant here. And I'm going to go to Event Triggers. I'm logged in as an admin here. So you can see all my event triggers. You can also see the various subscriptions I have. Notice that I don't have any of the any EventBridge subscription types configured today. And so on this available triggers area, this is kind of all the available triggers. So you probably saw Colin and others walk through this earlier. Event triggers. And so you can see there's a lot of event triggers that we've invested in, and we continue to expand this list. In fact, you may actually see a couple here that are pre-release. So, if you do see any, it's a sign of things to come. So this is kind of the Identity Now side of things. We're going to be configuring this side. Over on the AWS side here, we have the AWS console. And I'm currently logged in with actually a personal tenant here, or a personal account over on AWS. And we can go into Amazon Event Bridge. What do you know? It's something I recently visited. And so we're going to go over here, and you can actually see things like partner event sources. I don't have any partner sources set up yet. Nothing's set up. You can see that I have no event buses other than the default event bus. And so this is kind of a lay of the land. If you ever, kind of tip on AWS, if you're not sure how to navigate around, you can also use the search. You also can go to this handy, services menu and select the things that you want. I've put stars next to the things that we'll be kind of talking through today. So those are the things that we'll be touching in these various scenarios. All right, so let's get busy. So let's go back to our available triggers here. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is, we want to send things over to AWS Event Bridge. We want it to be things that are, things of interest, right? That will get logged. And so one of those things that we may want to send is any sort of aggregation events. And so what we're going to do is we're going to send this account aggregation completed. Now you click this, you're going to get some information about it. You see it's a fire and forget, so it's not requiring a response. You can see some information around kind of the data that's in this. This might be helpful for logging on your AWS side, so you can monitor these things, set up alerts, or even other types of processes from this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and subscribe to this. So when you subscribe to this, this is your typical flow here, and so we're gonna do aggregation events to Event Bridge. All right, and so we're gonna give it a description. We're just gonna use the same thing there. All right, and then the subscription type, you can send this via HTTP. This would be great. HTTP would be great for things like an iPaaS system, maybe a custom web service that you make or something like that. In this case, we're sending it over to AWS Event Bridge, and so what we want to do is select Amazon Event Bridge. And so notice that the options change whenever you do this, and these are very AWS-oriented settings here. And so this is a response deadline. This is kind of how long to wait around, and so what I'm going to do is kind of just use our default. You can, of course, change these types of things. Now, you also have to select a region. I'm going to select US East 1. That's where my tenant is. If you're not sure, you can actually go to the top corner of the menu, and it'll tell you what area it is. So you can see here, I'm in North Virginia, US East 1. That's where you can find that information. Now, your AWS account ID, this is usually a number. And I have this copied to my clipboard, and I'm going to paste it in there. I don't want to get that wrong. And so if you're ever interested in where you can find that, you can actually see this right here. You can actually copy it and paste it directly from this too, if that is something you want to do. So pretty straightforward. And then you can provide a filter. I want to give all aggregation events to Event Bridge. So I'm not going to actually provide a filter here. I'm just going to allow it to roll as is. And so what I'm going to do is hit save. And so now if you go to your subscriptions, you should see a subscription to aggregation events to Event Bridge. And you should see Amazon Event Bridge. It is enabled, by the way. Notice that there's no authentication type needed or anything like that. We already kind of handle that partnership and pairing. Now, we're only half set up yet. We kind of this will show up on the Event Bridge doorstep, and then we can take it from there and do further configurations. So we're going to flip over back to our console. We're in the Event Bridge section, and we should be able to see under Partner Event Sources, we should see this appear. If you don't see this appear, you can actually start the pairing process from this side as well. You would just do a search on SailPoint. You notice that you know, here's our logo, and that's the old logo. But here's our name, and you can set this up from this side as well if you want to. You know, part of the nice thing about doing it the way I did it is that it already shows up here. There's already, you know, a lot of decisions made for you, so you don't have to do quite as much. So what I'm going to do is go through and click on this. And what it's going to do is it's going to tell me that I can pair this. I'm going to associate this with an event bus. And what this is going to do is it's going to say, do you want to associate it with this account? This is kind of your safeguard. This is kind of your adoption process, if you will. Now, you can also send this to other AWS accounts too, so you can actually, if you have multiple AWS accounts, maybe you're a distributed organization, you can certainly do that. You can send it to other organizations. I'm not going to do anything like that. This is a pretty simple tenant. It's just my dev tenant. So I'm going to say associate. And so you can see here that it's active. Now, we're not done yet. We still have to make this go somewhere. And so you can kind of see in here, there's event bus. And you can see here that we have it right down here. It's not initiated. And so we need to go ahead and apply rules to it. And so what I'm going to do is go over to the rules section. And I'm going to select the account aggregation completed event. This is all those aggregation events that are coming over. Now, what rules do is that kind of plays traffic cop. Whenever an event comes through here, these rules direct where things go. So I'm going to create a rule here. And my rule is going to be really basic because we want to log all of our aggregation events. We're going to send those over to CloudWatch. So I'm going to call it log everything. And we're going to say, you know, this logs all aggregation events. Cool. Notice that the event bus is selected. And then you can also enable this on a schedule and things like that. We want this to be event driven. And so we're going to make this a rule with an event pattern. And so what this does is these event patterns can actually help you, you know, if you have various types of events coming through this, you can actually filter those out. Maybe if you wanted errors to go one way and, you know, successes to go another, you could actually certainly define rules that handle that. This one is pretty straightforward. It's our first one that we're doing together. So what we're going to do is go ahead and just use an event pattern here. We're going to use a standard event pattern. So I want this to come from our AWS Events EventBridge partner events. And you can certainly, you know, configure sample events and things like this. This is, you know, great if you want to leverage, you know, some samples and you know, do some end-to-end testing on the AWS side. For the sake of brevity, I'm just going to skip over this. Again, it is optional. And then, so what I'm going to do is the creation method, I'm going to use a pattern form. And then the event source, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say it's going to come from our EventBridge partners. And then I'm going to select SailPoint here. And I'm just going to say all events. You could get more fancy here. So if you wanted only certain events or things like that, you could certainly filter these things out. But you can see here, there's my event pattern. We're keeping it simple because all aggregation events are coming through this. So we're going to click next. And then it's going to say, where do you want to send this, right? And this is a fairly common paradigm that you'll see. We're going to do this over and over again. But a lot of this is where things change depending on our scenarios. This one, what we're going to do is send things to CloudWatch. And so what we're going to do is we're going to have this sent to an AWS service. You could actually send it to other EventBridge services or APIs or things like that. But we're going to send this to an AWS service. And so I said we're going to send it to CloudWatch. So we're going to look for CloudWatch log group. And so notice that when you select this, just like on our side, you know, when you select something, it offers more additional fields and configurations. And so we're going to also configure the log group where this is go. Now, CloudWatch may be fairly noisy, right? There could be lots of different types of logs from all different types of systems. So we want to define an exact place where this goes. And so what we're going to do is create an aggregation events log group. Let's see. Let me make sure I copy that correctly. Alrighty. So we have SailPoint aggregation events. That's where our target's going to go. And so we're going to say next. And you can configure tags and things like this. This is really great for if you want to monitor usage or, monitor billing and things like that. That's where you probably would use tags. I'm going to skip over that for now. Then it's going to ask you to kind of review everything, make sure everything looks good. I'm going to say create. And so what this did is it created this as a log. It says log everything, and the event bus is there. And now what we're going to do is come over to the SailPoint side and actually send a test message. And so what we're going to do is use this nifty little action over here and hit test subscription. And it's going to say, you want to send a test for this? We're going to say yes. Now, one thing you should know about tests is the testing actually uses some of the default data that's in the system. And so when you test something, it's going to send the default payload. Now, for logging events, this is pretty easy. We're just going to log it. We're going to see it appear over on the EventBridge side. Now, for some things, like if it's an identity change or something like that, and you're actually acting on that data, sometimes these actions may not be the best, right? Because they're not editable or they're using IDs that don't actually exist in the system. So just note that sometimes you have to recreate events in order to really test them end to end. So a little dev tip there. So that is the kind of EventBridge setup. Let's go now over to CloudWatch. And we should have received that event. This all happens really fast. So we should see that event. We'll go to log groups. And then we can see here that there is SailPoint aggregation events. And you can see here that there is a latest event time here. You click on this, and you can see the message payload that came from SailPoint. And you notice that everything under the detail section is what the event was that transpired from us. So you can see here, like this is simulating an event for a source called Corporate Active Directory, and it was successful, had no errors, but did have a warning. It had some statistics. There's also some metadata here of which trigger fired this and which invocation and things like that. So you have some information about what this is. So now, this just logs it because that's what we want to do, kind of starting off with the basics. But you can imagine some of the possibilities with this. Maybe if there's errors or the status wasn't successful, let's send those to a different place. So there's a lot of cool stuff you could do here. So that's really the first scenario that I wanted to share with you guys. So what we'll do now is talk about our next scenario. So our next scenario here is really around an identity change. So getting a little bit more advanced, but we want to basically have some sort of change event. So there's an identity change. Maybe we change somebody's department, and that's going to trigger an AWS event on EventBridge. And we're going to route that to Lambda. And if you're not familiar with AWS Lambda is serverless, and it's serverless runtime that'll allow you to kind of run your code whenever you want. And so the nice thing is you can kind of specify what type of code that you want to run there. So this again comes back to you can use your platform of choice. And so if you like, JavaScript, you can write JavaScript over there. If you want to write Python, you can use Python. I did mine in Python. We'll be sharing this event trigger with you guys. So what it's going to do is the EventBridge is going to route to Lambda, and it's going to call back to our SaaS platform using our APIs. And what it's going to do there is it's going to invoke a certification creation for a particular user that's moving. So now again, you can accomplish this same exact thing natively with our workflows, but we want to give an example of how you might do this in an external platform. Just as an example of something that you might do day to day. Maybe you want to get really advanced with that cert. Maybe you want to do some special, native change detection processing. All sorts of things like that are all available and things that you can certainly do. So let's get into this one. All right. So for this setup, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to available triggers. And I mentioned that we want to do this based on department change. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, and we're going to look for identity attributes changed. So you can see here there's, in this, it has the changes and the specific identity who changed. we're going to actually send this guy a certification. Now, again, this is we're gonna actually use live data rather than simulated data for this particular one. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna subscribe to this, and what we're gonna do is we're gonna call this, let's see, department change to EventBridge. The magic of copy and paste, we get our titles. Now again, we select subscription type. You can see that we have the settings there. We'll give a response deadline. Again, we select our region. You guys probably know it by heart by now. And then we enter our AWS account ID. You can also specify a filter here, so if you want to filter on certain changes or things like that. I'm going to let everything come through for the sake of this demo. You can also do filtering also on the AWS side. So if things come through and you want to make decisions, hey, did department change, or is this truly a mover event, or things like that, you can also define that there. So I'm going to hit save. Notice on subscriptions now we have department change going. It's identity attributes change on EventBridge. We're going to come back over here. I'm going to go to EventBridge. And before I go to EventBridge, I'm going to go over to Lambda. I want to show you that Lambda that we've already created. Lambdas are pretty easy to make if you haven't made one before. Again, it's pretty much just code in the cloud. And the nice thing is AWS gives you a little editor and things like that. So you can see here that there is, this is the thing that's being run. So this is a piece of Python, you can see here. This is running, and there's certain configurations it's using, environment variables for things like the URL and your client ID and secrets in order to create these certifications. You can see here that we're using our normal APIs. In this case, we're calling OAuth token in order to actually get a token first. And so once we have that JWT token, we can actually use that for our subsequent calls. And our subsequent calls are going to be create certification campaign with the certifier's ID, an identity ID, and a name, and it's going to configure a payload here. And then once it's created, we're also going to activate it. So we're going to make sure that happens. And so in here, we're going to make sure that certifier is SailPoint Services, which is the user I'm logged in here. In a real-world situation, you may want to make this a little more dynamic. Maybe look up who the guy's manager is or something like that. Again, this is just an example. Your creativity is your own. Notice that we also have some checking on status codes in here too, 200 versus 202. This is really where, our developer community documentation is fantastic. If you don't know what the status codes are, go check the developer documentation. Just go to developer.sailpoint.com, look up these APIs, and look up those status codes and map that in there. And so you're all good to go there. So now we're going to head back over to EventBridge. Now that you guys know what code's going to be executed here. And what we're going to do is we're going to do that pairing process again. So I'm going to go to Partner Events. You should see a new one here. This one's active. That's the one we did last time. Here's an identity attributes changed. And we're going to go ahead and associate this one. Say associate. Cool. Good to go there. So now we're going to go to our identity attributes changed under rules, and we're going to create a rule. And so this rule, again, you can give it whatever name you want. Since this is going to the generate access review Lambda, I'm going to make it called generate access review. And then the event bus is identity attribute change. Just make sure you got the right one here, especially when you have lots of these things. Again, we're going to use rule with an event pattern. We're going to still use the event partner events, and we're going to go through and make this ours. So you can see that there's a little bit of stuff here that's a little repetitive, but once you get the hang of it, you'll have it memorized. I think somebody once told me you have to do something 8 times to be an expert. So, all right. So then we're at our targets, and this is where some of the fun stuff happens, right? And so we can actually send this to CloudWatch again if we want. So if we wanted to send it there too, we can certainly do that. You can actually have multiple targets. And so if we wanted to say, I want to send this over to SailPoint identity events at the same time, we can go ahead and do that. So we'll paste that there. Oops, got an extra slash. And we're going to add another target too. And this is the target that we really want, which is the lambda. So that lambda function, it'll provide that drop down. And you can see here, here's that generate access review lambda function. That's the piece of code that we're going to have run. And so that's pretty much it. You say next. The nice thing about when you write lambdas is the fact that you can test them right there. So it's pretty cool. So create rule. All right, so we have this thing all wired up. We're ready to go. And so now I could go over here and I could say department change to event bridge, but that won't generate a cert because these tests, if you say test subscription, it's going to be using the data that comes with the trigger here. And so that would be this example data. And so if we try to generate a cert on John Doe doesn't actually exist in my system. So, we don't want to do that. So what I'm going to do is use a real person. And so what we're going to do is I'm going to go home here for a minute. And I'm going to go to one of my non-employees. So this is using our non-employee lifecycle manager feature. And I'm going to go to contractors. There's a dude named Rufus who's part of the Wild Stallions here. He's a new member. We're going to change some of his data here. And we're going to change his department from music to history. Now, because this person's no longer in that department, this should trigger a mover event. And because I'm doing this as the administrator, there's no approvals or anything like that needed. So I'm going to go ahead and say save. And what happened is this should have kicked off immediately from our side. We should actually see Rufus's data get updated. But we can actually go and take a look on the AWS side. And so if we go to CloudWatch, because we also pipe this in with CloudWatch, we should be able to go to the log groups here and see those identity events. And so we can see here, here's one identity event, and we can see that this came straight from SailPoint. We can see here's that Rufus identity, and his department was music, now it's history, right? So Rufus changed. So that's cool. Now, let's also see if the Lambda fired. Now, one of the things is that AWS does is your Lambdas, whenever you create them, they can automatically have logging groups associated with them. And so for the generate access review, you can see here, AWS Lambda generate access review, you can actually see some of the things here. And so you can see here's today's 3.9, that's today. And we can see all the code that ran. And this is kind of its runtime. So you can see here I was logging in with various client IDs and things like that. So if you wanted to introspect your Lambdas, this would be your function to go to. So you have multiple ways of kind of debugging these things. Now let's go over and, as an admin, go over and check out certifications. And so we'll go to campaigns. And notice that we have a brand new UI for all these things. And so we see here that we have a department change for Rufus that was created. Looks like we have one created yesterday too. I didn't clean that up, but that was me making sure that everything would run smoothly for you all today. So this is the one that we just generated, was generated today. Notice that we also calculated the end date dynamically. So we did 10 days after. You can see that in the Python script as well. So we just created a dynamic cert using Lambda. Isn't that cool? Alrighty. So that brings us to the end of that scenario. So let's actually go and let's do the next one. So the next scenario that I want to talk with you guys is scenario 3. This is around audit data archival. So this is something that we see customers ask is like, hey, you guys have a lot of events and you have search and you have all these great things and it's all searchable, but is there any way I can like save that off somewhere, a place where, it's untouchable or anything like that? And so, if you have AWS has options for that. One of its secure storage mechanisms is S3. They call these S3 buckets, right? And what buckets are is just a place to store them. Now you can also there's also S3 glacial, which is things that are really not changing very often. And so, you can store things there. So we're going to use EventBridge. We're going to store in S3. We're going to do this not via Lambda though. We're going to do this via a function, something called step functions on the AWS side. So let's get to it. So we're going to come over here, and what we're going to do is we're going to do that pairing process again. Now, before I do that, I want to also show you a little bit about step functions. So step functions are kind of like workflow in the AWS world. And you can see here, here's audit events to S3. What I'm going to be doing is, let's see if we can edit this. Hopefully I don't mess it up. It's very simple, and I'm going to give you the workflow definition for this, the step functions definition for this. And so what we're going to be doing is extracting some data from the event itself, and we're going to be sending that data keyed by the time to AWS or to S3. And so you can see here that if you were to look at some of these events, you know, they have a detail section. We saw that earlier, but there's search results, events, and things like that. So we're going to actually use the save search event to you know, take data from our search and send this over to AWS via EventBridge, which will eventually make its way into S3. And so we're going to key this based on time. So we're going to set this up to run every so often within our SailPoint platform. And so all this does is just indexes this by time. So as this event runs, it'll gather the data on the SailPoint side, send it over via EventBridge. EventBridge will receive that data and then pass it to the step functions, which will serialize that to S3. So kind of a lot going on here, but this is, you know, really showing you some of the power of using all these things together. You can certainly orchestrate a lot of things with S3 and its step functions. All right, so for this particular one, I'm going to start in search. All right, now in search, the way you search things is really with a search query here. Now, one of my favorite searches is created, if I can spell correctly. And so you can have created like 1D to now. So this is a called range syntax within the SailPoint platform. And so this is showing me anything that was recently created. And you can see here's a bunch of events that were recently created in the SailPoint platform because I've been using the system. You can see here's that change in Rufus. You can see that there's you know, various certifications that we created and things like that, right? So there's a lot of work that's been going on. So what I'm going to do is save this search, and let's actually let me just do 2 days. I think I've already saved this. Whoops. All right, now I'm going to save this search. I'm just going to call it like recent events. And so I'm going to save this. I'm going to come back to it. So these recent events I'm going to schedule. And so what we're also going to do is go to the admin side. We're going to go to event triggers. And we're going to go to, should be a scheduled search event trigger. So this is one that is, again, a fire and forget, but it takes data and based on your search, and we'll send it over. Now this example has a lot of different data, but it has things like entitlements, events, and things like that. So whatever your search pertains to is what we'll send over. Now, you know, you're on this case on the step function side, I'm extracting only events. So if there's other information in there like identities or, you know, account activity stuff, you know, that stuff, you know, could be present in the payload, but I don't care about it. I'm not paying attention to it. And so, so essentially, we're going to schedule this one. So we'll go to schedule search, subscribe. You guys know the drill. And so we'll say, you know, daily audit events. All right, audit with 2 I's. It's a very rare spelling. All right, so then we have, we're going to go to EventBridge. And again, you guys know the drill. So we're going to do some of the same settings. Response deadline. And we're going to get that account ID. And US East. And we're going to hit save. So this is now a subscription for daily audit events to go to Amazon EventBridge. And then we'll come back to scheduling this event. But this is wired up so that whenever we have a scheduled search and it is saved, this event will wake up and fire. And I'll show you how to schedule that here in a second. But before we do that, I want to go get the AWS site set up. So what I'm going to go over here is to Amazon Event Bridge. And I'm going to go to Partner Event Sources. And we have pending. You can see Save Search Complete is that event. Associate. All right. Now let's go to Rules. And we're going to choose Save Search Complete and create rule. And so I want to call this one SailPoint Audit Records. And we're going to use the same settings that we did last time. The event pattern is pretty much the same. Alrighty. Now for AWS Service here, we're going to go to Step Functions. And so Step Function State Machine. And then it says, which state machine do you want? And I have SailPoint Audit Events to S3. So that's that state machine that I showed you guys earlier. Now, whenever you write things to S3 and things like that, you actually had to do a lot of permissioning and through the IAM set. So what I did was I've already set all that stuff up. So this should just be able to run now. So we should be good to go there. Hit next, and we should be good to go. All right. So SailPoint Audit Records is all set up now. We should be able to see these things come across. Now, because these are audit records going to AWS, what I could do is I can do the action here, and I can say test subscription, because that's just getting serialized. That would work. The thing that I also want to do is actually show you how to do it in search. And so search is a cool feature here. So we'll come back to that search. So recent events, right? So we come in here. You can say new subscription. So this is how you subscribe to Save Searches, right? And so you can pick and choose your time zone, pick and choose how often you would like this thing to execute. And so like maybe we wanted these to be daily. So if we said, you know what, let's do, at 9 a.m., we'll send these over to AWS. So it gathers up those every night at 9 a.m. So we send these, and we can have that go daily. Now again, you can get more granular. You can go weekly, monthly. If you want to go weekly, you can say which days. Maybe if you want to do it during business times at 9 a.m., you could do that. Something like that. You can get very granular here. And so you give it a name. It already determines it based off your Save Search. You can say a detailed summary. Send the report even if there's no items. All those types of things you can certainly do in here. So you click next. Now, the cool thing about this is if I hit subscribe, this will run. And we're on here. It's about noon here Texas time, and so I don't want to wait till 9 a.m. So how do I do this to make sure it's relevant? Well, I can actually send a test. Now this says as an email button, but this will also have the event. And so what we'll do is we'll say send test event. Now what will happen is this sends it over to AWS as well, because it invoked the event to have an email come out. So we should have received something here. Now we can actually go to CloudWatch, because any sort of run of our states, step functions, state machines, should show up in here too. So you can see states here. We have SailPoint Audit Events to S3. We can see that there's a run right here. And we can see that this ran. You can see that it started and it succeeded, right? Now, last thing here is we have S3. And I'm almost done. So we have audit records. You can see here that they're indexed by time. Here's today's. We can click on this and you can see the data. Actually, if we click on this, you can open this up and you can see there's all of our data from our audit. So that's how you can get things over there if you want archival and things like that. So very cool. So that kind of brings us to the end of our third scenario. So thank you guys for allowing me to kind of showcase this with you guys. So final thoughts, this is powerful, right? It's powerful serverless event bus, something you guys can leverage. You guys be creative. You guys are the developer community. I'm really excited to see what you guys put together, and feel free to share this with the SailPoint developer community. We're really happy to see things you make. So thank you guys.